High earners are often the most financially fragile people I know. Most people believe that if they just hit that next income milestone, $200,000, $500,000, a million, their anxiety will vanish. They think the gap between what they earn and what they spend will finally widen enough to let them breathe. But the data tells a very different story. I know lawyers earning $500,000 a year who are 3 bad months away from total ruin. They have high cash flow but zero freedom. If they stop working for 90 days, their entire life collapses. On the flip side, I know teachers who never made more than $60,000 a year who retired as multimillionaires. The difference isn't the paycheck, it's the psychology. Here is the uncomfortable truth about your freedom number: it doesn't exist. The anxiety you feel right now about money, it doesn't disappear when you get rich, it just changes shape. And unless you understand why, you will run on a treadmill until you collapse. Most of us operate under a delusion. We view money as a linear equation. We think income minus expenses equals wealth. Therefore, if I increase the income variable, the wealth variable must automatically increase. It seems logical, it seems obvious, but this equation is missing the most volatile variable of all: ego. When you get a raise, you don't just save the difference, you upgrade your identity, you move to the slightly better neighborhood, you drive the slightly better car, you put the kids in the slightly more exclusive school. For 2 weeks, it feels like progress. It feels like wealth. But by week 4, that luxury car is just your car. That expensive neighborhood is just where you live. Your brain normalizes the upgrade. The dopamine hit fades. But here is the trap: the financial cost of that new life stays. So now, you have the exact same level of happiness you had when you were broke, but you have 10 times the overhead and 10 times the pressure to maintain it. This is why the executive earning $300,000 often feels more trapped than the junior employee earning $50,000. The junior employee has limits and budgets accordingly. The executive has built a golden cage so expensive they can never afford to stop working. We think we are climbing a mountain, getting closer to the peak. In reality, we are running on a treadmill, sweating, exhausted, and getting nowhere. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't a failure of discipline, it's a failure of biology. To understand why high earners go broke, you have to understand a concept called the hedonic treadmill. Your brain is not designed for contentment, it is designed for survival. In the modern world, survival signals have been replaced by status signals. When your income jumps, your brain doesn't see that extra money as freedom units or investment capital. It sees it as the new baseline for your standard of living. Think back to when you were a student. You likely lived in a cheap apartment, ate cheap food, and drank cheap coffee, and you survived. You might have even been happy. Then you got your first real job. Suddenly, you needed a better car because you were a professional now. You needed a distinct wardrobe. You needed to live in a safer neighborhood. Fast forward 10 years. Now, flying economy feels like a struggle. Drinking instant coffee feels like a punishment. A hotel room that isn't 4 stars feels dirty. You haven't actually changed. Your biology is the same. But your baseline for suffering has shifted. This is the first psychological hurdle high earners face: expectation inflation. When your income jumps, your expectations jump with it, usually at a 1-to-1 ratio. You don't just spend more money, you raise the floor of what you consider acceptable living standards. And the dangerous thing about raising the floor is that you can never go back down without psychological pain. Humans are incredibly loss averse. We feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining it. If you drive a 10-year-old Toyota, driving a new Mercedes feels great. But if you drive a new Mercedes for a year and then have to go back to the Toyota, that feels like a failure. It feels like a crisis. So, high earners unconsciously build a life that requires their high income just to maintain their emotional baseline. They aren't buying freedom, they are buying a golden cage. They lock themselves into a lifestyle that demands 100% of their energy to sustain. And this brings us to the most important distinction you will ever learn in personal finance. There is a massive difference between being rich and being wealthy. Society uses these words interchangeably, but they are actually opposites. Rich is visible. Rich is current income. Rich is the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the vacations you post on Instagram. Rich is what you spend. When you see someone driving $100,000 car, the only thing you know about their finances is that they have $100,000 less than they did before they bought the car, or worse, they have $100,000 more debt. Wealth, on the other hand, is invisible. Wealth is the money you didn't spend. Wealth is the car you didn't buy, the first class upgrade you declined, the watch you didn't wear. Wealth is options. Wealth is assets that earn while you sleep. Wealth is the ability to wake up in the morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. The problem is that we live in a world that celebrates rich and ignores wealth. You can see rich, you can't see wealth, you can't see someone's brokerage account, you can't see their lack of debt. Because we are social creatures, we learn by imitation. This is what the philosopher René Girard called mimetic desire. We don't desire things intrinsically, we desire things because other people desire them. We look around at our peer group, the other lawyers, the other engineers, the other business owners, and we copy their signals. If everyone in your firm wears a Rolex, you don't buy a Rolex because you love horology. You buy it because it is the uniform of your tribe. If you don't wear it, you feel a subtle social pressure, a signal that you don't quite belong or you aren't quite as successful. So high earners end up playing a status game that is impossible to win. The finish line of the status game is always moving. If you make $200,000, you hang out with people making $200,000. But then you look up and see the people making $500,000. They have the vacation home. So you work harder, you get the promotion, you reach $500,000. Do you stop? No, because now your peer group has shifted. Now you're surrounded by people making $1 million, and they fly private. It never ends. There is always a bigger boat. The only way to win the status game is not to play, but that requires a level of psychological fortitude that most people simply don't have. It requires you to be okay with looking poorer than you actually are. It requires you to be the person who drives the Honda Civic to the meeting where you're closing $1 million deal. It requires you to derive your confidence from your competence and your bank balance, not the logo on your chest. Now, you might be thinking, okay, I get it. Don't buy fancy stuff. But I'm not buying Ferraris. I'm just paying for a nice house and good schools for my kids. Where is my money going? This is the second, more subtle trap, the high cost of convenience. High earners usually suffer from a severe lack of time. If you are making a lot of money, you are likely trading a significant amount of your life force for it. You are working long hours, handling high stress, and managing complex problems. When you are exhausted, your decision-making fatigue sets in. You stop asking, is this worth it? And start asking, will this make my life easier right now? You order takeout every night because you're too tired to cook. You hire the expensive landscaper because you don't have Saturday mornings free. You take the Uber Black because you need to work on the way to the airport. You begin to use money to solve problems that were caused by making the money in the first place. It becomes a cycle. You work hard to make money. The work makes you tired and stressed. You spend money to alleviate the stress and buy back time. This raises your burn rate. Now you need to keep working that hard job to pay for the convenience that allows you to work the job. You are running on a hamster wheel made of gold, but it's still a hamster wheel. And here is the kicker. Fixed costs. The most dangerous thing high earners do is inflate their fixed costs. Variable costs, like dining out or vacations, are easy to cut if things get tight. If you lose your job, you can stop going to Hawaii. That's easy. But fixed costs, the mortgage, the car leases, the private school tuition, the club memberships, those are the killers. Those are the golden handcuffs. When you allow your fixed costs to rise to meet your income, you remove your optionality. You lose the ability to take risks. Let's say you're an executive earning $300,000, but your mortgage and lifestyle cost you $20,000 a month to sustain. You are effectively poor. You have no margin for error. You cannot quit your job to start a business. You cannot take a sabbatical. You cannot leave a toxic work environment because the bank requires its monthly tribute. Compare that to someone earning $100,000 who lives on $4,000 a month. That person is technically poorer on paper, but they are infinitely freer. They have leverage. They can walk away. They own their time. Wealth is not a number. Wealth is the ratio between your ego and your income. If your ego rises as fast as your income, you will never be wealthy. You will just be a highly paid conduit for money to flow from your employer to luxury brands. You are simply a middleman in the economy, keeping nothing for yourself. I want you to really sit with that. Are you building an asset column? Or are you just building a high maintenance life? The reason this matters, the reason I am harping on this psychology, is because the skills required to get rich are completely different from the skills required to stay rich. Getting rich requires offense. It requires risk taking, optimism, and putting yourself out there. It's about generating cash flow. Staying rich requires defense. It requires humility, paranoia, and frugality. It's about accumulation and preservation. Most high earners are all offense, no defense. They are great at making money, but terrible at keeping it. They think their high income is a permanent state. They think, I'll always be able to make this much. But history is littered with the graves of high earners who thought the music would never stop. Industries change, skills become obsolete, burnout happens, health issues arise. If you build a life that requires peak performance and peak income to sustain, you are betting against entropy, and entropy always wins eventually. So, what is the shift? How do we break this psychological loop? It starts by redefining success. You have to detach your self-worth from your spending. You have to realize that true status isn't what you own, it's what you control. The most impressive person in the room isn't the one with the loudest watch. It's the one who doesn't need to check the time because they own their schedule. When you start viewing money as stored time rather than spending power, everything changes. Every dollar you save is a claim on your future time. Every dollar you spend is a surrender of your past effort. When you buy the $80,000 car, you aren't just spending money. You are spending the hundreds of hours of stress and meetings and emails it took to earn that post-tax money. You are trading a chunk of your life for a piece of metal and leather that will lose 20% of its value the moment you drive it off the lot. Is that trade worth it? Maybe. Maybe you really love cars. And that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't have nice things. I'm saying you shouldn't have nice things mindlessly. The goal of wealth psychology is to move from mindless consumption to conscious allocation. Most people sleepwalk through their financial lives. They let their environment dictate their spending. They let marketing dictate their desires. They let their neighbors dictate their standards. You need to wake up. You need to look at your income and say, this is a tool. What am I building with it? If you are just building a gilded cage, stop.
The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up and say, I can do whatever I want today. That is the only luxury that never goes out of style. That is the only status symbol that actually matters. But to get there, you have to be willing to look weird. You have to be willing to be the person who makes a lot but doesn't look like it. You have to be willing to save when everyone else is spending. You have to be willing to drive the old car while your portfolio hits seven figures. It's uncomfortable. It goes against our tribal programming. It fights against the dopamine hits of instant gratification. But the alternative is working until you're 70 to pay for a life you never actually had time to enjoy. The choice is yours. You can look rich or you can be wealthy. You rarely get to be both, especially in the beginning. Now, understanding this trap is the first step. But knowing why we do it isn't enough. We need a system to stop it. We need a tactical approach to manage the cash flow so that the wealth bucket gets filled before the ego bucket can steal it all. Because willpower is not a strategy. You cannot just try harder to save. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary biology. You will lose.
So the next time you get a raise, don't ask, what can I buy? Ask, what can this buy me out of? The question isn't whether you can afford a nicer life, it's whether you can afford to never stop working for it. If this made you think differently about money, subscribe. No hype here, just clarity. See you in the next one.